So do you feel happier today than you did 8 months ago?
Yes. Calmer, which certainly leaves room for happier. When you don't feel like your hair's on fire every single day, it definitely leaves room for a happier, calmer life.
Hello, hello. I hope you are having a wonderful day today. I have a very special guest that I want to introduce you to, Kara Brinster. She is born and raised North Dakota. She is an attorney who does everything within the family law arena: divorce, custody, adoption. She does mediations, parenting evaluations, and she is also the elected state's attorney for her county. So she has quite a full plate. She also is a mother. She is a wife. She's able to be an avid crafter again and an avid quilter again. And she goes camping. She loves all the things camping and quilting. We have fun conversations about that. And when she first came to me, her life was very different than it is now in terms of how she feels. And one of the big things I remember talking to you about, Kara, is how you wanted to be happier.
Yes.
Do you feel like you're happier today than you were? I think we've been working together, what, like 10 months?
Hmm.
So do you feel happier today than you did 8 months ago?
Yes. Calmer, which certainly leaves room for happier. When you don't feel like your hair's on fire every single day, it definitely leaves room for a happier, calmer life.
Yeah. And I just want people listening to this know that it's not like we cut work out of
No,
what you're doing.
I don't have time to cut work out of what I'm doing. I have, well, two full-time jobs, I guess. I mean,
Yeah.
technically they're part-time, but there's nothing part-time about being a lawyer.
No, and then when you're also a mom, like you
Yep.
have responsibilities that are not always going to be in sync with your law practice and the way that it works. You're going to need to leave early on days. And we worked on that together around things that you were doing that you weren't creating boundaries so that you could go pick up your daughter Ella when you wanted to just leave, and you weren't putting work until the very last split second before you had to leave to pick her up.
Yes.
Yeah.
I now have an hour at the end of the day that's just for like cleanup, whatever little things need to be finished before the next day. I don't take do scheduling anything after 4 o'clock.
Mm. I wanted to bring you onto the podcast because one, I think it's really difficult for people to understand what coaching is and the impact that it can have until you actually experience it.
Yes.
And I'm curious for you, is there anything that really surprised you about the work we did together?
Probably how much I really got out of it. Like I don't know that I expected as much as what I got.
Ooh.
How much calmer I feel about, I mean, there can be 100 bombs going off and we just take a deep breath and keep pushing forward. And I don't know that I could do that before.
Interesting.
Um, I think before I started coaching, it was a constant thought of there has to be a better way to do this, but never really knowing how to find that. And through coaching, I got there. Like I found a way to function and manage and breathe because there are days that don't feel like you can breathe. And now I know how to manage all of that, even though the workload didn't change. I mean, I still have as much work to do now as I ever did. But now I manage it better than I ever did. And so I can breathe.
Yeah.
I don't feel like I'm constantly hitting a panic button.
Yeah. And it's interesting because when we're hitting that panic button and we think we have to do everything now, then what happens is our nervous system gets really activated and it makes it impossible for us to think. And that makes it impossible for us to problem solve calmly. And sometimes we're creating problems we have to go back and fix. But when you calm your nervous system, like we work together to do, you were able to have more brain power, more energy, so that you could address the things that were happening in your practice that felt like fires and do it in a way that was a lot cleaner, creating good boundaries for yourself. You were releasing any resentment around anything because it was, and correct me if I'm wrong, it was like you felt more control over situations.
Yeah, it definitely was. And certainly a lot less like thinking about work outside of work because I was tracking things better. We found solutions for some of the things that kept driving me crazy because I couldn't figure out how to get past an issue because I couldn't get my brain to get out of my own way. And,
That's right.
and so we found ways to put solutions into place to have my assistants help with things that I was otherwise taking ownership of that I didn't necessarily need to take ownership of. And so it created a calm that I didn't otherwise have. Because we could put work on the people that we pay to do work,
Revolutionary.
right? And I don't have to own it all. I have people that I can trust to do some of those tasks, and it meant that I didn't have to be thinking about everything at every minute of every day.
This also brings me to something that we talked about, which was you weren't just doing that at the office, like keeping everything stored in your head, wanting to do the things. You were also doing that at home. And it was creating some resentment towards your husband because you felt like you had to keep everything in your head. Tell me
Right.
about how that played out for you and how you resolved that.
I I think finding a way to calm my nervous system down and get my brain out of my way allowed me to figure out how to tell my husband what I needed. I need you to do this, that, and the other thing. And he could hear me because I wasn't approaching it in a way that made it harder for him to hear because I sounded more complaining than, asking for help. And now we found different ways that he knows what the things are. Like what does drive me crazy? What there
Right.
are still things that drive me a little bit crazy, don't get me wrong. But we have found ways to get around some of that, and to problem solve for it without having to get mad or angry about how things were going.
Can you talk a little bit more to this? Because I think just about every single attorney I talk to has issues with their significant other and how things are getting done in their household. And they're very angry about it and they feel resentful about it and they're holding on to it and they don't know how to communicate it or they try to communicate it, but then their partner doesn't understand them and then they get frustrated. So I'm curious, how do you handle those moments when you have something you want to ask of your husband and you want to communicate it, but it doesn't seem like they can hear you?
Well, first of all, I have to stop talking like a lawyer because I am so used to being directive.
Mhm.
I have to take that hat off for a minute and remember that this isn't a lawyer-client relationship with my husband. It's not me telling him what to do. Sometimes he reminds me to quit lawyering him, um, because it's hard to to get out of that role sometimes, and to move into a more like I don't have to be directive with you. I can we can ask and we can talk and we can have conversations. And so a lot of times I have to remind myself of that. But we've found an app that works for sharing information because we can keep, like, if I'm thinking about something, I can just like sort of brain dump it onto it's a like a note-taking type app, that allows me to put everything down that I'm thinking about, and then he can check it.
Do you know the name of it?
It's Google Keep.
Okay, I'll put it
It
in the
lets you just make like to-do list type notes or calendars and different things like that. And it lets us I can just dump it all out because sometimes my brain randomly pulls these things up out of nowhere, random, and then I can write it down in some place where he can see it, and I don't have to try to remember to tell him about it later. And then he'll go into the shared note and find whatever it is we're looking for. And so then he can do the things too. And it's not just me holding on to all that information,
Mhm.
which sometimes is the problem is he doesn't even know what he doesn't know.
Yeah, I mean, so many of us expect people to read our minds, which it would be sometimes it would be wonderful if they could do that, but I think it would also be very confusing.
No,
I don't want people to know what's in my head.
no, that would be bad.
But that also brings me to keeping everything in your head and having these conversations with your husband, but also creating a relationship with your calendar. So you're not keeping everything in your head when it comes to what you need to do. Can you talk about your can you talk about your experience with the calendar and maybe kind of give us a snapshot of before you and I started working together and then after we started working together?
So before my calendar was just appointments. What appointments were coming up that day, or hearings. It never had anything else on it. I maybe had a random to-do list on in a notebook page that was probably 3 weeks old, and everything else was in my head. If there was a deadline or a due date, it was all floating around in my brain. I was the only one that knew when anything was due. Um, and that was it. Like that was my method of keeping track. I mean, there was maybe a deadline put on a calendar. If it was like a trial deadline where we got a scheduling order on a hearing, like those kind of things got put on the calendar. But if a motion was filed and there was a response due in 2 weeks, yeah, that was in my head.
Oh my gosh. How was
That didn't make it on a calendar.
how is that
Um,
impacting your practice?
well, I never missed a deadline, but I'm pretty sure I probably missed some sleep because I kept those things would just like pop in my head at random days and times. Oh yeah, I got to get that one thing done. And so when are you doing it? At 10:59 on the night that it's due and it's due by midnight
Mm,
and you're cramming it out. Well, now with your help, I started weekly going through my digital calendar and moving it onto my paper calendar like the week before and then doing a brain dump like 20-ish minutes of time just writing down everything that was in my head and and then building space into my calendar to do all of the things that needed to be done. And so all the gaps in the calendar, you have an appointment at 1, another one at 4. Well, you've got a few hours in between. What are you going to do? That got calendared. What was I going to do during that time? And all of those extra deadlines that I was probably holding on to in my head, um, my assistants now put on the calendar so that I can see them coming.
mm. Yeah,
And so we worked out a method in our office to get all that stuff on the calendar so I didn't have to hold on to it.
yeah. I think that's
Um,
what lawyers don't understand is that once they start figuring this stuff out for themselves, that then it keeps compounding how much easier it gets. So you figure out how to use your time, and then you realize, oh, wait a minute, I can ask my assistant to do things in the system that I like because now I know what I like and I know what I want because I've been trying it, I've been figuring it out myself. And then my assistant can take over some things and it keeps compounding. So you might notice something cleaning up, having more time now that you've cleaned up some things, but then you make more time because now you've systematized it and you pass that on to your assistant and then she takes care of it.
yeah. Amanda goes through at the I don't even know how often she does this because it just magically appears on my calendar. It's great. But she puts in blocks of time. Every week has so many blocks of time to do actual work, and it's blocked out ahead of time so that nobody can calendar over the top of it including me. I can't calendar over the top of it. I'm really bad at screwing myself up. You know, I'm supposed to have a block of time to work, so I let somebody have an appointment there.
Mhm.
Except I can't because she put it on the calendar. And
Yeah.
so it looks like it's blocked out, so I'm less likely to calendar over the top of it.
That's a pro tip.
And so, yeah, block it out. Make time, put time on the calendar in advance for time to do actual work. Um, and then you can go home at 5 o'clock if you want to.
Yeah.
Or in my case, 3:30 on Mondays because we have dance class an hour away.
Gotta make sure that you set things up for the life that you want to have. And that brings me to helping you create the time that you wanted and you helping yourself create the time that you wanted to do the things you enjoyed. So, one thing you do enjoy is spending time with Bella,
Yep.
but you also love spending time in your craft room.
Hmm.
And it took some time to get in there, but now you're in there, right?
Yep. Yep.
What helped you do that? What did you do differently? Because, and I want anyone listening to know, like, okay, maybe you're not a crafter, but what kind of hobbies have you been putting to the wayside that you absolutely loved? Maybe you stopped hiking once you became a lawyer. Maybe you stopped reading for free time, those kinds of things because there was no such thing as free time anymore. Maybe you enjoyed playing an instrument and you just stopped, but you really wish you could do it. Well, Kara, tell us how you did it.
Well, I worked backwards. I put that on the calendar first. Um, I want to leave at noon on Friday so that I have this works better in the school year than it does in the summer, by the way, because then Ella's in school on Friday afternoon, not at home. But I leave at noon on Friday. I put it on the calendar. That's what I do.
Yeah.
And then that noon to 3 or 4 o'clock till she's out of school, I can do what I want to do.
Yeah.
And that's spend time working on different projects, whether it's a quilt or a craft project. Um, I have a good friend and I go on quilt trips and we calendar those out like 6 months just to make sure neither one of us get anything booked over the top of it because she too is a lawyer. Um, and I highly recommend getting a lawyer friend who does your hobby because that is a person you can vent to because they absolutely know with no backfill what you're going through. Um,
Yeah.
and uh, it's great that way just because then I don't have to try to explain what is the problem or what's funny about that story. We can visit without um, having to explain
It's less fun
why.
when you have to explain the joke.
Yeah, it's a whole lot easier if they already understand. But we put those weekends on the calendar way in advance so that we have time, so we make time to
Yeah.
do it.
Because you make
Um,
time for what's important to you. I think a lot of us we're hoping that more time's going to open up, or we think, well, if I just work a little harder, if I just push a little harder, more time is going to open up. Has that been your experience?
no,
I don't know why so many people think that. I think we just forget or we're not accustomed to thinking about it in terms of we create time versus feeling like we're at the victim of everybody else's assignment that we're getting. And once you begin taking control, when you start feeling more power in your life to say, yes, I will do this. No, I'm not going to do this. No, I'm leaving at this time. I will figure out a solution to this because I don't want this frustration or this thing going on in my practice anymore. Once you start taking that power back, you start to make that time. It's not magic, it's decision making from clarity.
it is. Um, it's absolutely like I said, it's a backfill. I put the important thing on the calendar first,
Mhm.
and then I fill in everything else around it.
Yeah.
And then I say no to the things that aren't going to serve making that happen.
Mhm.
So, that new client who clearly you can tell from the get-go is a little too needy. Nope, don't have time for that. Thank you very much. We're we're just going to say no to that. There's no amount of money that is going to make that worth giving up the other time,
Yeah. And
that
that
important time.
that really comes down to one of the things that I teach here on the podcast or with any lawyer I talk to is put yourself on the calendar first. But what will happen is that you will feel guilty, especially if You're I love the face. If you're not watching this, there's a YouTube video of it, and Kara has these wonderful reactive faces. You're going to feel guilty because you've put yourself on the calendar and something comes up. A client walks in the door and says, "Hey, please, 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 you're amazing at this. Please, please, please," versus you having the resilience to say, "What I want matters. This is what I have decided ahead of time." What's coming up for you? Because I see you nodding.
It took some time and a whole lot of coaching to keep that time on the calendar that was important for me. Um, and probably the other thing and this just popped in my head is I also have a 2 hour time block on my calendar for doing like office billing stuff because I own the firm. Somebody has to pay the bills, and that's me. And I have a 2 hour block of time on my calendar for that. And I spent a lot of time walking over the top of that.
Yeah,
Um, and it's it takes little bit of work to convince yourself that it's okay to say no because it's not going to feel okay at first.
right.
It's okay to say no to the client that walked in the door. Um, it's okay to do that because I think we all maybe come from a place of feast or famine where you're always afraid that there's not going to be the next client walking in the door. If you say no to this one, there won't be another one to take their place. And that's highly untrue. If this client thinks you're that good, they'll wait till next week.
Yeah,
And if they don't, there'll be somebody to fill their place. And it's reminding yourself of that, and that sometimes is hard to do. And coaching got me through how to say no
mm,
as much as anything else. How to create that space and call it important and not let anybody walk over the top of it. Um, and I needed that. I mean, I went into the end of last year not having one single month's worth of records built into the system. I spent 3 months trying to fill all that in, and now I'm not even 5 minutes behind on doing all of that billing. Everything is current because I built that time into the calendar and I learned to say no to anything that might come over the top of it.
yeah. That's a big deal. And you're not the only lawyer who's had that happen. And I talked to a lot of lawyers who set aside time to do bills, to do time entry, and they don't do it. Not because they don't know how, not because they're bad at it or anything like that, just because they haven't yet learned the skill of saying no to other things. They haven't yet learned how to forgive themselves when they do the opposite of what they say they're going to do. What just came up for you? She's got like such a fun, like smirk. It's really adorable.
It's so like this is some I mean it still happens sometimes, don't get me wrong, but it used to be all the time where I would plan how things were going to go for the day and we'd get 15 minutes into the day and something would happen and the whole day got thrown aside. And by the end of the week, which is where my time slot is to do billing, I would feel like I needed to catch up on whatever I didn't get done during that week
Mhm.
instead of doing the thing that I set aside time to do. And so through a lot of work with calendaring and the mind dump and managing my time, I'm a little better at even the things that come in that sort of throw off the day because they're going to happen. Particularly when you're the state's attorney and somebody went to jail. Um, those tend to come up kind of rapidly. Um, and it's going to throw things off, but you learn how to adjust and you learn how to manage that so that you still get that time at the end. I learned how to leave bigger breaks in my day to accommodate when those things were going to come up and how to um, be honest with myself about how long things were going to take to do. Because I think we all kind of cheat ourselves on that. Oh, it'll just take 5 minutes, 3 hours later.
Right.
And so learning to be honest with how long things are going to take, breaking down each task or step into how long it's going to take so that you account for everything. I think I must continually lie to myself about how long things take. Um, and it got me to be honest with how long it was going to take, and it made me more realistic in what I could handle.
Hmm.
And so I learned to prioritize better and how to keep those things scheduled in there and allow I pretty much don't calendar Thursday because Monday, Tuesday, and Wednesday are going to take longer than I thought.
Hey, that's a good strategy. If you know that automatically you're going to need more time, that's one thing you can do. I think that's what some people don't understand about calendars is that it's a process learning how to use it in a way that works for you and your style. And everybody's going to be a little bit different, and they're going to find things because everybody has a different practice area. They have different demands on their time because of their practice area. Maybe they work in big law, whatever it is. And it does take, there's a learning curve to start to follow through on the things you say you want to do, begin to say no more, and then do the things that you're discovering, which is, hey, I've got this solution. If I understand that typically I'm going to go over, I'm going to give myself more space. And maybe there's other solutions like really breaking down, okay, how much time am I deciding to commit to these different areas? So there's other solutions for it, but that's one solution that right now is working for you.
Right. I mean, I could probably get more honest with myself, but part of it is also knowing that I do have some interruptions that happen in my day pretty regularly that I can't really calendar or account for because more spontaneous than that. Um, but I can leave a space at the end of the week that lets me shift everything down if I need to.
Yes.
And if I have a big opening gap on Thursday, I promise there's still plenty of work to fill it in.
Right.
I just grab something from the next week and bring it forward and work on it. It hardly ever happens though, because there's enough of these spontaneous things that kind of pop up that let me it works for me to do it this way. And other people would, maybe able to break down their tasks and not have as many of these spontaneous interruptions that kind of come up. But
When
for
we say spontaneous interruptions, I think we should just we'll make it a little clear. So some people, their spontaneous interruption may be a client matter that needs to be handled right away, but as a prosecutor, you have officers coming into your door and you can't get a hold of these officers typically. And so if they walk through the door, you're like, please, yes, let me grab you, let me talk to you, let me make sure that we're on the same page about this case, because you cannot get a hold of officers for the most part.
right,
So
as
you do have to drop everything and say, yes, let's talk.
we try to count schedule with them to come in to talk about things, but sometimes we're talking about guys who are coming off the night shift.
Right.
And they just want to stop by quick before they go home. They see your car there and they're like, yep, I'm just going to pop in really quick. And I never want to feel like I'm telling them, no, we can't have a conversation about a case that's important to them. And so it's just, or it might be that bail hearing
Yeah.
that pops up because you don't always know when somebody's going to jail. And so those come up too. And so I leave a half a day of space at the end of the week to cover when those things happen so I can shift things into that place. And I do. Sometimes my calendar looks like it's a sticky note mess because because then I can pick it up and move it where I need it to go if I got interrupted in that time block, I can pick up that sticky note and move it into the next spot.
Mhm.
And so that lets me do that. And so I've adjusted my style a little bit. When I first started, I literally write it on the calendar. My what block this is and what I was going to do in that block, and now I put it on sticky notes so I can shift it around if I need to.
Beautiful.
Sometimes it's a client calling you back that you've been trying to get a hold of for a week and a half.
Yeah.
So you take their call when they call. And yeah, so it those interruptions happen and that's just part of the job sometimes. And so you got to find a style that works for you. But through coaching, I got there. That's what I got was how to do this.
Yeah, but you also like you get the how, but you also gain that inner knowing back. I think so many of us lose that when we go to law school because we're in this fear already. We're trying to prove ourselves. We want to be good enough. We want people to think we know what we're doing. And so we start following what other people are doing. I think we've even had a conversation about that where you were kind of following some things an old boss had
Hmm.
how to do things, right? And but you start to regain that inner knowing of what you want and what feels good to you and how you can make that happen with experiment and trial and error. And now that's one of the reasons you're happier is because you now are guiding the ship whereas before I don't think you felt that way.
Exactly. I was informed a lot by where I came from. I think we all are informed by where you come from, who you worked for in the past, what kind of ideas and notions they stuck in your head. And challenging some of that to fit better to what I really wanted was huge.
Where have you seen some of that come up for you?
How many calendars do you really have to keep?
That's right. That's right.
Um, I had like three. I had a work one, a home one, and a paper one, like two digital and a paper. Uh, Shutting off the alarms
Well,
on
let's tell them why.
those calendaring events.
Well, let's go back and tell them why that was an issue, like why you were keeping so many calendars.
Because my old boss called it a malpractice thing to keep two calendars. He had this like thing in his head where he had to have two calendars. It had to be two different ones. Like when I first started at his firm, there were two paper calendars.
Okay.
Like one big one for the whole firm and then like an individual one for each lawyer, paper. And then the digital on top of that
Yeah.
as we started getting into digital. Um, and so when I transferred over, when I came out on my own, I we had the digital calendar, which is what everybody puts things on. But then I would sit every time there was a calendar event and I would transfer that onto my paper calendar. And so then my paper calendar and my digital calendar were sometimes out of sync. Things weren't transferring where they needed to be. And it actually turns out that that's probably a bigger pain in the butt to have two calendars than um, it is to just have one. And so we worked on figuring out which one worked best, basically. And I still use my paper calendar, but in a completely different way than I used to.
Right.
Um, I used to rely on the paper more, and now I rely on my digital more. Um, and so, yeah, that was probably our biggest
Yeah.
thing was,
I mean, and the reason I wanted to share that is because I think there's a lot of lawyers working right now from these old ideas of how things are supposed to be, but then they never question it. They never wonder or they never even ask, is this what I want? What is the reasoning behind this? Does that reasoning make sense? Does it make sense for me now working in 2025? Like, is that something that even matters? And so when, we start working together, we start seeing these things come up. But
and
I want
there were more things that were old boss ideas that kept kind of triggering in my brain that we'd find when we started sort of challenging why we did things, why I did things the way I did them. And I'm not remembering any specific ones right now, but there were other ones where we'd be going through something and I'd just be like, why am I thinking about this way?
to,
Where is this coming from? And then I realized it wasn't my idea. It wasn't something that came from me. It was an idea that I brought forward from my former employer. And, you know, he gave me a lot of really good things. So I don't want anybody to think that working for him was bad, but there were some things that I had to challenge why I did them the way I did them.
and I want to switch gears here a little bit because we spent a good amount of time on how you manage your time and how you started to really release some of these old ideas and start to test new ideas and reconnect with what you wanted. And that really brought us to revamping part of your practice when it came to how you make money and ensuring
Hmm.
you get paid, which we can't even really, I mean, we start at the beginning to I think we raised your rates, like we talked through that.
Hmm.
So you were making more money from the beginning. And I always like to do that with lawyers because I want them to get their investment back immediately. But that's not always, there's always going to be a longer term plan. And so once your time was all cleaned up, then you started seeing other things that were going on because you had that calmness about you and you could see, oh, wait a minute, like my retainers are getting low and they're not getting replenished. And then I'm noticing that I'm feeling resentful or a little upset that I'm doing this work, but I'm not actually getting paid up front for it. So we started looking at that. Can you kind of share how we transitioned into that and what you started to discover after you cleaned up the time aspect of your practice?
Ooh, we looked at my retainer agreement. So in family law, you do a lot. You get a retainer, and maybe that's as far as you ever got was just getting that initial retainer. And so we started looking at how to do that better. And now we do a replenishing retainer, and we set up guidelines and we talked through those guidelines, like what made sense for setting like a baseline. When are you going to go back to the client and say, hey, you need more money? And my initial thought on when that was, once we talked it through, was way too low. Um,
Yeah,
well, and because we talked it through and it made sense to actually give them more time to put that money down and give ourselves enough breathing room that if we had to do anything, we still had money. So the biggest part of it was literally just was talking it through. How were we going to do this? And we, looked at the retainer agreement. What was wrong? Like, not necessarily what was wrong with it. It was a fine retainer agreement, but what needed to change to match what I wanted to do. Because there's no point in being resentful about not getting paid if you can get paid.
right. I mean, the only thing that wasn't happening was you weren't asking for what you wanted.
Right.
Tell
And
me.
and I never, I mean, it's not that I didn't know that we could ask for new more money, but we just never did it. We didn't have a plan in place to do it.
Yeah. And I think that a lot of lawyers get stuck there where they want to raise their rates, but then they start doubting themselves. They're like, well, I don't really have time to go through all that. We'll just deal with it now. We won't do it. We'll just do it later when I have time. Or they're afraid to ask for more money when they know they actually need to get paid more in order to meet their expenses and to meet the expectations of their clients and all of that, pay the bills, but they're afraid to ask for more because they're afraid the client's going to walk away. And
Right.
I'm curious how you experienced that in raising your rates, but then also in our conversations.
Nobody walked away.
Mm.
Nobody has batted an eyelash at the higher retainer amount. Um, I've had clients come back from like former clients that have now come back into the for various reasons. I tell them the new rate. I haven't even had they don't even like flinch. Okay. I tell them the new retainer amount. Okay. That I mean, and that is all that there's nobody's even flinched at the new amounts. And so waiting did nothing but prevent me from being calmer because I'm now not angry about the fact that nobody's paying their bill. Or I should say we're less angry about that. But there's no point in being the busiest lawyer in the room if you're not getting paid.
And then,
And so we just had to come to terms with the fact that you can withdraw.
yeah, I mean, that's a really big deal is you feeling comfortable with the fact that if they don't want to pay, they are not my ideal client. They are not somebody who is going to replenish the retainer if that's needed for me to move forward in the case. I need to just say goodbye. And
Yeah.
That does require fortitude. It does require resilience because your body is saying, wait a minute, danger, danger, danger. We're going to lose money. That puts us in physical harm, danger.
But
And
you aren't losing any money.
exactly.
The only money you're losing is what you could earn by letting that client go and taking on one that actually can pay.
Yeah. Yeah.
The money you're losing is the money that you are forfeiting by doing work you know you're not getting paid for. And so we needed a plan. At the end of the day, we had to come up with a plan for how this was going to go, and we talked through that a lot.
And then you got like, we talked through how to get your staff on board so that you wouldn't have to keep track of things. Can you
Yeah.
tell us that?
Well, we explored the system that we use Clio for our practice management software. And we explored that system for like, what do we need to do so the system alerts us? Um, Figured that out. We set a plan for, when we were going to set that dollar amount for and who was going to have that conversation. Who's going to have that conversation with the client?
Mhm.
Is it me? Is it my assistant? Who's going to bring it to our attention? How are we going to know about this? And now we have staff meetings every week that we
Yes,
didn't ever used to have.
I'm just
Um,
saying, everybody, it'd be 15 minutes staff meeting. It's magic.
and we troubleshoot what we might see coming at those meetings. My associate attorney works in a different town office from me, and he zooms in for those meetings so that we can all be in the same place at the same time for 15 minutes. And we've come up with ideas for how, if we see a problem now, we problem solve it together, all four of us, and figure out how we can fix it. And that's amazing. And that 15 minutes has produced some pretty good results for us to know what we want to do and how we want to do it. And um, it's been great. And it keeps us all connected together, which is really nice too.
Yeah. And that's a long way because I remember when we first started working together, you had pretty much like an open door policy where they just came in, your assistant would come in, interrupt you if you were in the middle of something. And then you started realizing, well, when I go outside there for paper or whatever I need, I can just ask really quickly, is there anything you need? I'm going to go back in and I have a time block, right? Like, how is that working for you right now?
Good. With our staff meetings, we have less of those kinds of things. Because I'm catching them without having to have another time frame. Um, and then yeah, when I go out to get a drink or when I get up from my desk, I'll just stop and anybody need anything. And then my brain's already interrupted
Mhm.
at that point, so it's much easier to handle the question and then refocus on what's next if I'm already in the middle.
Yeah.
So
And I just want to spend like a couple minutes on these meetings because I think lawyers are confused sometimes how you set them up so you can not have a long meeting and get the most value out of them. And one of the things I know that you do is you check in to see about retainer replenishments. What else do you check in on? Do you ask any questions so that you can get the most out of your meetings?
we have a running agenda. We just created like a Word document on the computer. Everybody knows where it is. If you have a thought about something or you need to talk about something, you put it on the agenda. So we have a running agenda. And then we just very briefly, anybody have anything else? Nope. Okay. And because we do it every week, it takes less than 15 minutes. And we do it right before lunch, so everybody is motivated to be done.
Like that. Yeah, it doesn't have to take a long time and you can get so much out of them. And they have that compound effect again of, okay, we handle this problem, we handle these problems. And then now when something comes up, we handle it right away. And then there's no fire in the future.
Right.
Okay.
Yeah. We are catching things before they become an issue. And so it's the staff meeting has actually added to everybody's productivity.
Oh, I love that. What is your staff able to do now that you have those meetings?
Usually we're catching Now I'm trying to think of something that we catch when we do these meetings. But it's one of the last things we talked about was utilizing like the task feature in Clio, and how we wanted to do that, and that we're going to give it a try right now to see how it works out. Is it going to benefit everybody? So when you, instead of sending an email or another kind of message, you create a task and you assign it to them. And then when it's done, they click done and it sends it back to you that it's done. And it cuts down on the amount of um, back and forth we have to do because you put it all into one event.
Mm,
And that came out of a staff meeting. Using that feature came out of a staff meeting. So they're finding those suggestion things and pushing them forward. So
mm. I love that. All right. So let me ask you this as we wrap up here. Is there anything that you wish I had asked you or that you really want other lawyers to know about anything that either you and I have talked about or we've talked about here on the podcast?
coaching is worth it. It was worth every minute that I've put into it because it's definitely made me more productive, and calmer, which is a huge deal when you are juggling home and office and kids and family and all of the demands on your time. Just being able to be calm and slow down. Um, I move much slower now than I ever used to. I used to feel like my hair was on fire all the time. Um, but I'm calmer and slower, but I get a lot more done than I ever did before because I'm moving at a pace that lets me think.
Mm.
And I got that from coaching.
Ah, can you please tell everybody listening where they can find you if they want to refer somebody to you, if they want to check out your website, which is really good. I really like your website. It's very clear, says, who you are. I'm going to put that all these links in the show notes, but is there anything besides the website you'd like to point their attention to?
Our website's probably our main point of contact, but we're Brinster Law PC in Carrington, North Dakota. And I am living proof that you can live in the middle of nowhere and have a very successful practice, especially this day and age with electronics and our ability to do everything from everywhere. So, our website is brinsterlawoffice.com. And yeah, if you have a client in North Dakota that you need to refer, we're here.
Yeah. And honestly, I think that lawyers who care about their clients like you do, it's very clear to me from the work that we do together. You love your clients, you want your clients to be happy, you want what's best for them. And so many heart centered lawyers undercut themselves on their rates, they undercut themselves on what's possible for them in their practice. And what you really did is say, no, I'm worth having what I want. And you invested in yourself and you invested not just, money, but time and energy. And you're consistently showing up for yourself and your business. And it's just reflected on everything you're creating in your life. And I just want to acknowledge how beautiful that is.
Thank you.
Thank you so much for joining us here today. And thank you, everybody, for being here. I'm going to link to Kara's website in the show notes, and I will talk to you next week. Bye.